GD 104, The Design Process, with Duncan Heather. Before we begin, write down what your definition of the word process is. What is a process? If necessary, stop the recording. When you've finished, restart the video. The dictionary definition of the word process is defined as a series of steps, actions, or operations used to bring about or create a desired result. The design process is similar. It is a sequence of problem-solving and creative steps used by the designer to develop an appropriate design solution for a given client and site. It allows the designer to develop a solution for each new project, and it also helps us to justify our own work to our clients. The design process involves the following phases: research and preparation, the design itself, the preparation of construction and tender documentation, the implementation or the actual construction itself, and ongoing evaluation after the project is completed. If we look at research and preparation first, this involves a number of different steps. The first being meeting the client, signing the contract, preparing a site survey, looking at a site analysis plan, and finally the design brief. There's a lot more to meeting the client than just answering a telephone and making an appointment. The ability to ask the right questions in the right order is paramount to a successful first contact. It's very important that the students are able to establish what sort of budgets are involved, the size of the garden, and the size of the project prior to making an appointment with a client. And all this will be discussed in a future lecture on telephone technique. Having made an appointment with a client and gone to see them, you'll need to discuss how much the project is going to be worth. You need to walk around the site while discussing their requirements, discussing budgets and cost per square metre, and finally agreeing on a fee scale for the design work. As a result of that meeting, you will prepare a client brief together with an estimate for the design work. The client brief provides the designer with a comprehensive list of design objectives. It allows you to confirm the design requirements with the client prior to any drawing work being carried out. And it can act as a checklist or reminder to the designer during the design process. The client brief can be very important. I had one situation where I was supposed to meet both clients and only met the husband as the wife had been called away on business. Having had a very successful meeting with the husband, I confirmed in writing exactly what his requirements were. I had a letter of acceptance, and 2 weeks later went round to discuss the plan and met the wife for the first time. For one reason or another, there were several parts of the plan that she didn't like. She was particularly intent on keeping an existing pond, which would have ended up in the middle of a new lawn area, which would have meant a whole new redesign. I did come back with a revised drawing, but still felt it important to relocate the pond to a different location. But she was adamant that she wanted this existing feature to stay. In the end, she turned around and said that she wasn't paying for the design. And she used the excuse that I put a large natural pond at the bottom of the garden, which she felt was going to be dangerous for her newborn child, until I pointed out that the husband had specifically asked for a large pond at the bottom of the garden. And as this was included in the client brief, which they had signed, she didn't have a leg to stand on and ended up paying the design fee in full. It's very unusual to have a dispute at the design stage with a client, but having a signed client brief setting out exactly what they want could come in useful if there are any disagreements. Next comes the site survey. You'll either prepare this yourselves if the garden is small, and I would suggest under 1/4 of an acre, and reasonably flat as well, because the more sloping the site, the more complicated the survey will be. Otherwise, you'll get a land surveyor to complete the survey for you, and he will do this and present it as a CAD drawing so that you can input it into your own CAD programs and design it on the computer. On the screen you can see a survey prepared by a land surveyor with contour lines, the position of the house, existing trees and an existing driveway. This plan later becomes the site analysis and inventory. It's prepared in conjunction with the site survey. Its purpose is to identify all the vital conditions of the site and determine how they influence the design solution. The inventory records factors such as soil, slope, prevailing wind direction, site orientation, sun and shade patterns, and specific views. The site analysis evaluates the information obtained from the site inventory, then determines how the design solution should respond to these influences. You can see from the plan on the screen that there are photographs of the site, as well as the position of the sun, both in the morning, afternoon and evening. You may also want to include shadow detail on this drawing in order to help determine where terracing and sitting areas should be, and also what areas of planting will be in shade and therefore require a different approach to the plant selection. There are two design styles that we'll be teaching you on this course. One is pattern analysis, which is the John Brooks approach. The other approach is called the survey analysis design, sometimes called the SAD process, because it can produce some very sad-looking designs. The SAD process moves you through 3 different major steps: pattern analysis or functional diagrams, the sketch plan, and the master plan. Functional diagrams are freehand sketches that utilize bubbles and arrows to graphically depict the main elements of the design as they relate to each other and to specific conditions of the site. Much of this involves common sense and being able to ask yourself the right questions. They are created by combining the information obtained from the site assessment inventory and the client brief. It is a method of combining written information from the client brief with specific information from the site. If you think of these bubbles as thought bubbles, and each bubble depicts a major area of the garden. So for instance, you'll have a patio bubble, a pond bubble, a lawn bubble, and maybe a swimming pool or a tennis court bubble if the garden's big enough. The designer explores the different relationships of these bubbles within the site survey. Again, think of them as pieces of card cut out which can be moved around the site, and different combinations and relationships can then be explored very quickly. Functional diagrams are crucial to the design process because they study the overall functional organization of the site. They study the location, size, proportion, configuration, views, etc. of all the spaces and elements of the design in a conceptual fashion. And they provide a general organizational structure for a design and can be considered the underlying foundation for later phases of the design process. The second phase of the design process begins with the sketch plan. Taking the information from the bubble diagram, the designer produces an illustrative site plan depicting all the elements of the design in a stylized, semi-realistic manner. It provides the client with a comprehensive view of the overall plan. It studies the coordination of all of the elements of the design. It looks at the appearance and aesthetics of the layout. And it provides the client with an opportunity to comment on the proposed layout. It's important to remember that before you start to formulate the sketch plan, you should put aside the bubble diagram so it doesn't influence your design shapes too much. Keep in your head the chosen positions for the major elements of the design. At this stage, as with the bubble diagram, the sketch plan is drawn without the use of drafting equipment, using just a tracing paper and a graphite stick. Once you finish the sketch plan, it should graphically represent both 2- and 3-dimensional elements of the design in a semi-realistic way, and relies on basic drawing skills to illustrate the dimensional quality of the drawing, primarily through line weight, contrast, shadow, and texture. The thicker the lines on the drawing, the taller the elements appear, and therefore the house, outbuildings, trees, walls and hedges are all usually drawn with a thicker line. Items that recede back into the plan are drawn with thinner pen or pencil. Here, planting, rough grass, flower border edges are all drawn with thinner pens or pencils in order to give them the sense of receding back into the drawing. An understanding of the ways shapes relate to each other is at the very heart of garden design, as it's the creation of a strong ground pattern that is vital to the success of any project. Proportion is vital to any form of design, whether inside or out. And when one arranges objects, you are seeking a balance between the masses and the spaces. You should already have done this with your first design exercises to be able to actually create a balance between the empty space and your shapes. This yin and yang of positive and negative space can be applied to the garden. Positive space equaling the planting, the negative space the paving and the lawn.